Avoidance is not always weakness. Sometimes, emotional withdrawal is a psychological defense created to protect a person from feelings that once seemed overwhelming, dangerous, or impossible to control. A person may appear distant, detached, or completely self-sufficient, but that outward behavior does not necessarily reveal what is happening beneath the surface. From a Jungian perspective, the important question would not simply be why someone avoids closeness, but what inner experience makes closeness so difficult to tolerate. A person may have learned, consciously or unconsciously, that depending on others leads to disappointment, rejection, humiliation, or loss of control. Over time, independence becomes more than a healthy preference. It becomes a protective identity. The person tells themselves, "I don't need anyone," because needing someone would force them to confront emotions they would rather keep buried. This is where the unconscious becomes important. The person may genuinely believe they are simply protecting their freedom, while another part of their psyche is protecting itself from vulnerability. When intimacy increases, buried fear can become activated. Distance then provides immediate psychological relief. The person feels safer because the emotional threat appears to have disappeared. But protection and healing are not the same thing. A defense can keep pain away while also keeping genuine connection away. What once helped a person survive emotionally can eventually prevent them from experiencing the very intimacy they may secretly desire. The persona can hide fear because people often create an outward identity that feels safer than revealing what is happening internally. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the social face we present to the world, the version of ourselves that we believe others can accept. For someone who avoids emotional closeness, that persona may appear confident, independent, rational, calm, or even completely uninterested in relationships. They may say they do not need anyone, dislike emotional conversations, or prefer to handle everything alone. On the surface, this can look like emotional strength, but beneath that appearance, there may be fears the person does not consciously recognize. Vulnerability can make them feel exposed. Dependence can feel like losing control. Emotional intimacy can create the possibility of rejection, abandonment, disappointment, or being deeply hurt. Instead of admitting these fears, the person may construct a personality around independence. The danger is that the persona can become so convincing that the individual eventually believes it represents their entire personality. They no longer see independence as a strategy. They see it as who they are. When someone approaches them emotionally, the persona feels threatened because genuine intimacy requires the person to reveal parts of themselves that have been carefully hidden. This creates an internal contradiction. The conscious personality says, "I am perfectly fine alone," while the unconscious may still carry a desire for connection, affection, and acceptance. The more strongly the persona insists that vulnerability is unnecessary, the more carefully those vulnerable emotions may be pushed into the unconscious, where they continue influencing behavior without being fully understood. The shadow contains what consciousness rejects, and this idea becomes especially important when trying to understand emotional avoidance. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is not simply the bad side of a person. It represents emotions, desires, fears, needs, and qualities that the conscious personality has learned to suppress or deny. A person may decide that vulnerability is weakness, dependence is dangerous, or emotional needs are unacceptable. Instead of integrating those parts of themselves, they push them out of conscious awareness. For someone who constantly avoids intimacy, the shadow may contain exactly the emotions they are most uncomfortable admitting. They may secretly long for closeness while consciously insisting that they do not need anyone. They may fear rejection while presenting themselves as completely unaffected. They may desire affection while becoming uncomfortable whenever someone offers it. The contradiction can create a powerful internal conflict. When these rejected emotions are activated, the person may experience discomfort without understanding its true source. Someone becoming emotionally close may trigger fear, irritation, numbness, or an intense desire to create distance. The person may believe the problem is the relationship or the other individual, when the deeper conflict is occurring within their own psyche. Jung's perspective suggests that what is rejected does not simply disappear. The unconscious continues carrying it, and it can influence choices, reactions, and relationships. This is why avoidance can become repetitive. Until a person becomes conscious of the emotions they have rejected, they may continue reacting automatically whenever intimacy brings those hidden parts of themselves toward the surface. Dims an identity when emotional withdrawal is repeated so often that a person eventually stops seeing it as a behavior and starts seeing it as part of who they are. At first, creating distance may have been a response to discomfort, fear, disappointment, or a need for emotional protection. It may have helped the person feel safer when closeness became overwhelming. But when the same response is used again and again, it can become automatic. The person may begin describing themselves through their avoidance. They might say, "I have always been independent. I am just not emotional," or "relationships are not for me." These statements can sound like genuine self-knowledge, but sometimes they are explanations built around an old psychological defense. The individual no longer asks why they withdraw, because withdrawal has become normal to them. From a Jungian perspective, this becomes significant because the conscious personality can identify strongly with a particular role while remaining unaware of what exists beneath it. Independence may become the persona. Emotional distance becomes proof of strength. Vulnerability becomes something to reject. Eventually, anything that threatens this identity can feel psychologically uncomfortable. When genuine intimacy appears, the person may experience an unconscious conflict. Becoming emotionally close would require them to behave differently from the identity they have constructed. Instead of seeing this conflict clearly, they may retreat and tell themselves that leaving was simply their natural choice. The deeper issue is that a protective behavior can eventually imprison the person inside the very identity they created for safety. What began as a way to avoid emotional pain can become a fixed pattern that determines how they understand themselves, how they approach relationships, and how much vulnerability they permit into their lives. Independence can become defensive when a person no longer uses self-reliance as a healthy choice, but as a shield against emotional vulnerability. Genuine independence means being capable of standing on your own while still allowing yourself to connect with others. Defensive independence is different. It says, "I must never need anyone," because needing someone feels dangerous, uncomfortable, or humiliating. A person may become extremely proud of handling everything alone. They may avoid asking for help, resist emotional conversations, and feel uncomfortable when someone tries to get too close. From the outside, this can look like confidence and strength, but psychologically, the motivation behind the behavior matters. If independence exists primarily to prevent disappointment, rejection, dependence, or emotional exposure, then it may be functioning as protection rather than freedom. In a Jungian sense, the person may have built a persona around being completely self-sufficient. They identify with being the one who never needs support, never becomes emotionally dependent, and never allows another person to have too much influence over them. The problem begins when this identity becomes rigid. Relationships naturally require some degree of trust, vulnerability, compromise, and emotional openness. Defensive independence interprets these experiences as threats to autonomy. This can create an internal contradiction. The person may want companionship but reject closeness once it becomes emotionally significant. They may want to feel loved but become uncomfortable when another person genuinely cares. They may desire connection while simultaneously protecting themselves from the very conditions that make connection possible. The deeper psychological challenge is learning that autonomy and intimacy do not have to be enemies. A person can remain an individual while allowing another person to matter deeply without surrendering their identity or sense of self. Projection can distort relationships because people sometimes unconsciously place their own fears, insecurities, or rejected emotions onto another person. In Jungian psychology, projection occurs when something within the unconscious is experienced as though it belongs primarily to someone else. Instead of recognizing an uncomfortable feeling inside themselves, a person may interpret that feeling as evidence about the other person's intentions, character, or behavior. For someone who struggles with emotional avoidance, this can become particularly powerful. Imagine a person who is deeply afraid of being rejected. Rather than consciously acknowledging that fear, they may begin believing that the other person is too demanding, too emotional, too dependent, or impossible to satisfy. Their internal discomfort becomes attached to the other person's behavior. They may genuinely believe they are simply responding to a problem outside themselves. The same process can happen with vulnerability. If someone secretly feels emotionally exposed but has learned to reject vulnerability, they may perceive another person's desire for closeness as pressure or control. The other person may not actually be trying to control them, but the avoidant individual experiences intimacy through the lens of their own unconscious fears. Projection can also protect the ego. If admitting, "I am afraid of becoming emotionally dependent," feels threatening, it may be easier to think, "This person is too needy." If admitting, "I am afraid of rejection," feels painful, it may be easier to decide, "They are going to hurt me anyway." Jung's perspective encourages deeper self-examination. Instead of immediately asking what is wrong with the other person, psychological awareness asks what the reaction reveals about oneself. When projection becomes conscious, the individual can begin separating genuine problems in the relationship from fears originating within their own unconscious. The unconscious repeats unfinished conflicts because experiences that have not been emotionally understood or integrated can continue influencing behavior long after the original situation has ended. In a Jungian perspective, the unconscious does not simply forget what the conscious mind refuses to confront. Unresolved fear, rejection, disappointment, or emotional pain can remain psychologically active, quietly shaping reactions to new people and new situations. This is why someone may repeatedly experience similar relationship patterns without understanding why. They may meet different people, enter different circumstances, and still react in remarkably familiar ways. At first, everything may feel comfortable because emotional distance allows them to maintain control. But when genuine closeness develops, old fears can become activated. Suddenly, the person feels overwhelmed, loses interest, becomes emotionally distant, or begins searching for reasons to leave. The conscious mind may explain each situation differently. Perhaps the timing was wrong. Perhaps the other person was too emotional. Perhaps the relationship became boring. Perhaps independence simply felt better. Yet beneath these explanations, the same unconscious conflict may be repeating. Intimacy activates vulnerability. Vulnerability activates fear, and fear produces withdrawal. Jung would encourage us to look for the pattern rather than becoming fascinated by each individual event. If the same emotional reaction appears repeatedly, it may be revealing something deeper within the personality. The important point is that repetition does not necessarily mean the person consciously wants to recreate painful situations. The unconscious can repeat what has not been understood because familiar emotional patterns often feel safer than unfamiliar ones.
A person may unknowingly choose emotional distance because it is psychologically predictable, even when that distance prevents the connection they consciously claim to desire.
Until the underlying conflict becomes conscious, the pattern can continue controlling behavior without the person fully realizing why. Intimacy exposes the hidden self because genuine closeness makes it increasingly difficult to maintain the emotional identity a person presents to the outside world. When someone remains distant, they can carefully control what others see. They can appear confident, independent, unaffected, and emotionally self-sufficient. But deep intimacy requires something different. It requires openness, trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to allow another person to see emotions that may normally remain hidden. From a Jungian perspective, this can bring unconscious material toward consciousness. A person may have spent years believing that they do not need affection, reassurance, or emotional support. But when someone becomes genuinely important to them, those hidden needs may suddenly become impossible to ignore. They may experience longing, fear, jealousy, insecurity, or a desire for reassurance that conflicts with the identity they have constructed. This creates psychological tension. The person may want closeness while simultaneously feeling threatened by it. They may become unusually uncomfortable when someone asks deeper questions, expresses strong affection, or expects emotional openness. Instead of recognizing these reactions as signs of internal conflict, they may interpret the relationship itself as the problem. This is one reason intimacy can feel frightening even when the other person is safe and caring. The danger may not be coming from the outside. The relationship may simply be revealing parts of the personality that have remained unconscious. The closer someone gets, the harder it becomes to hide behind the persona of complete independence. Emotional needs begin appearing. Old fears become activated. Contradictions become visible. The person discovers that beneath the identity of "I need nobody" exists a more complicated psychological reality. Intimacy, therefore, becomes a mirror. It does not necessarily create the hidden self. It reveals what was already present beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged and understood. The shadow must be integrated, not destroyed, because the parts of ourselves we reject cannot simply be eliminated through denial. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents emotions, desires, fears, needs, and qualities that the conscious personality refuses to recognize or accept. For someone who has learned to see vulnerability as weakness, feelings of dependence, sadness, fear, or longing may become unacceptable parts of the self. Instead of understanding these emotions, the person pushes them away and tries to live according to an identity built around strength and emotional control. But rejecting these parts does not make them disappear. They continue existing within the unconscious and may influence behavior in indirect ways. A person may insist that they do not care, while becoming deeply affected by rejection. They may claim they want complete independence, while secretly longing for connection. They may become uncomfortable with emotional closeness, while feeling lonely when that closeness disappears. Integration means becoming conscious of these contradictions without judging them. It does not mean allowing every emotion to control behavior. It means being able to recognize, "I feel vulnerable," without immediately running away from the situation. It means understanding fear instead of allowing fear to make every decision. For someone struggling with avoidance, shadow integration can therefore be a profound psychological shift. The goal is not to become constantly dependent, emotional, or exposed. The goal is to develop enough inner awareness to hold both independence and vulnerability without believing that one must destroy the other. Jung's deeper insight is that psychological wholeness comes from accepting the complete personality, including the qualities that the conscious ego finds uncomfortable. When the shadow is acknowledged, it becomes less mysterious and less controlling, allowing a person to respond to intimacy consciously rather than automatically retreating whenever hidden emotions begin to surface. Individuation requires responsibility because psychological growth is not simply about discovering who you are. It is about becoming conscious of your patterns and accepting responsibility for how those patterns influence your life. In Jungian psychology, individuation refers to the gradual process of becoming a more complete and authentic individual. It involves recognizing the parts of yourself that have been ignored, rejected, or hidden behind a social persona.
For someone who repeatedly avoids emotional closeness, this means eventually looking beyond explanations that place all responsibility outside the self. It is easy to say, the other person was too demanding, relationships are exhausting, or I just need my freedom. Sometimes those statements may contain truth, but if the same pattern appears repeatedly, deeper self-examination becomes necessary. Responsibility does not mean blaming oneself for every emotional difficulty. It means becoming aware of personal reactions and recognizing that choices have consequences. If someone withdraws whenever intimacy becomes uncomfortable, they may need to ask what fear is driving that withdrawal and whether the behavior still serves them.
Individuation requires courage because awareness can challenge the identity a person has carefully constructed. Someone who has always considered themselves completely independent may discover a deep desire for connection. Someone who believes they are emotionally unaffected may discover unresolved fear or grief. These discoveries can feel uncomfortable because they challenge the familiar image of the self. But psychological maturity begins when a person stops automatically obeying those defenses. Instead of asking who is responsible for their discomfort, they begin asking what their own reactions are revealing. This does not mean accepting unhealthy relationships or abandoning personal boundaries. It means understanding the difference between protecting yourself consciously and escaping automatically. Through that awareness, a person gains greater freedom to choose how they respond rather than allowing unconscious patterns to make every decision for them. You cannot force another person into consciousness because psychological awareness cannot be imposed from the outside. A person may receive advice, patience, affection, reassurance, and countless opportunities to change, but none of these things can substitute for their own willingness to examine themselves. From a Jungian perspective, becoming conscious is an internal process. Another person can illuminate a pattern, but they cannot walk through the psychological doorway on someone else's behalf. This becomes especially important when dealing with emotional avoidance. Someone may recognize that a person is withdrawing, suppressing emotions, or repeatedly creating distance, and they may believe that enough love will eventually make that person feel safe. They may explain their feelings again and again, offer endless reassurance, or attempt to prove that intimacy will not lead to rejection. But if the individual remains unwilling to confront their own fears, these efforts may accomplish very little. In some situations, constant reassurance can even become part of the avoidance cycle. Whenever discomfort appears, another person removes the pressure by explaining, comforting, pursuing, or repairing everything. The avoidant individual then receives temporary relief without having to understand what caused the discomfort in the first place. Jungian psychology places great importance on confronting the unconscious. That confrontation must ultimately be voluntary. A person has to become curious about their reactions and ask why closeness creates such powerful resistance. This is why another person's responsibility has limits. You can communicate honestly, you can establish boundaries, you can offer compassion without abandoning yourself. But you cannot make someone examine their shadow, accept vulnerability, or develop emotional awareness. Real psychological change begins when the individual chooses to look inward. Until that happens, even the most genuine love from another person may remain outside the walls they have built around their own unconscious fears. The greatest shock is self-confrontation, because the person who constantly escapes emotional closeness may eventually discover that the deepest conflict is not always with other people, but within the self. From a Jungian perspective, psychological growth begins when a person stops looking exclusively outward and becomes willing to examine what their own reactions are revealing. Avoidance can create the illusion that peace comes from keeping everyone at a distance, but distance can only silence certain emotions temporarily. A person may spend years believing that relationships are the source of their discomfort. Whenever intimacy becomes intense, they withdraw, create emotional distance, or convince themselves that the connection was never important. The immediate result can feel like freedom, but after the tension disappears, another feeling may emerge: loneliness, emptiness, regret, or the quiet realization that something meaningful was pushed away. This is where self-confrontation becomes unavoidable. The person may begin asking questions they previously avoided. Why does closeness feel threatening? Why does emotional dependence create such discomfort? Why does the desire for connection appear alongside an urge to escape? Why does the same pattern keep repeating with different people? These questions can be unsettling because they challenge the identity of someone who believes they are simply independent or emotionally detached. They reveal that what appears to be a choice may sometimes be an unconscious defense. Jung's idea of individuation suggests that becoming whole requires facing these contradictions rather than eliminating them. The goal is not to condemn avoidance or shame the person for protecting themselves. It is to understand what the protection is guarding. The deepest transformation begins when the person realizes that running from intimacy has never guaranteed freedom. It may only have created distance from the very emotions that were asking to be understood, accepted, and integrated into consciousness.